On the third day of the second impeachment trial for Donald J. Trump, we sit down with Darryn Harris for a wide-ranging exclusive interview. Harris is the chief of staff for California Congresswoman Karen Bass. I'm Michael Reel, and this is Real Urban News. Darryn, take us back to January 6th. You were there in the nation's capital. Take us back to those moments.
I thought January 6th would be a routine work day. Most folks don't know, but the Capitol has been closed to visitors for about a year since we shut down for COVID, to mostly members and to staff folks. And so it's been pretty empty, but we knew that there would be a lot of excitement within the city because the President Trump, was having a rally near the White House, stop the steal.
And to use a favorite term that all of you people really came up with, we will stop the steal.
Don't concede, march to the Capitol. I mean, these are things that we knew were happening for some time. He talked about this moments following the election results. And so what the House was doing on January 6th, why it was so important that day, is that the joint chambers were certifying the elections, the electoral votes, to notify and let the country know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris was the next president and vice president. And so it was just, wasn't out of the ordinary, for this president to throw a rally on a day like that. But we did assume it would be a routine work day, that there would be some procedural maneuvers to prolong the certification, but ultimately we knew that we would certify the next president and vice president of the United States. And so it's funny that you mentioned that, because going to work that morning, your friends, your family, was saying, "Are you really going in today?" And I'm like, "You guys don't understand. The Capitol is the safest place in all of DC. There's no way that you can breach the perimeter of the U.S. Capitol, especially at a time like this when you have both chambers seated with the vice president." I mean, think about it. This is like the State of the Union minus the Supreme Court and the president. And so you knew that the security would be extremely, on high alert. And if it was any place that would be in D.C. with the Trump supporters, it would be at our Capitol.
Did your office receive any kind of advance warning?
The entire city knew. Not only was it, conveyed through email messages, but, banners on the freeways. Just let you know a huge event was happening on the 6th, and to avoid the downtown, area. So we knew what was happening, that day. And so when returning to work, that morning, you do the routine things, you check in, you show your badge, you go and you sit down. And at that point, you hear the president say, "We're going to march to the Capitol." And so at that point, you kind of start thinking like, I know they're not coming down here, not the U.S. Capitol. And that's what they, did. They, stormed the Capitol. They breached the perimeter.
But you were there. What was going through your mind? When did you realize that the Capitol had been breached, or in layman's terms, attacked?
Well, we knew. I first learned by news. I watch the news all the time. We were in the Capitol complex. So the Capitol complex is a sundry of buildings, many buildings. One is the building that most folks are familiar with, has a dome and the two chambers. But around the main building are Senate member office buildings and then House member office buildings. And so I was in the House office building, watching everything unfold on TV.
And where was Karen Bass?
Well, Miss Bass, originally she was in the chamber, in the gallery. Because of COVID, you don't have every single member on the floor at the same time. And so members are socially distanced throughout the chamber, some in the gallery when they're not speaking or voting per se. And so she was in the gallery, but she returned back to the House office building because we had a virtual Zoom meeting, for her around that time that she was participating in. And so we were all in a safe and secure location. Immediately, I knew that something was not right, and so we locked our doors to secure ourselves, but never did we think that we'd be on lockdown for 6 hours.
So you and the Congresswoman, you all were prevented from moving around, as you say, on lockdown for a total of 6 hours?
The entire building was on lockdown. There were no folks who were allowed to enter, and we weren't allowed to leave either.
Could you all hear the screams, and could you hear the insurrection taking place?
When you're on lockdown, you heard things in the hallway, and so I can't confirm who those folks were. But at that point, there was a lack of trust within the building. And so, the folks that you knew or the folks that you trust, you start to think like, well, how did this take place? There's no way that you can just penetrate the Capitol grounds, unless there was some inside job. And so I know there's a call for a full investigation, for what happened on January 6th.
You were so concerned that you, on your personal phone, made a Facebook post telling your friends and family that you were fine and safe. Talk about that, and what made you turn to that device and put out that Facebook message?
At the time, I was in shock that this was happening. At the U.S. Capitol, you thought there would be someone to just stop what was going on. You were looking; it looked like as if it was like the event was unhinged, and no one was really stepping in to stop, the insurrection, which was going on at the time. So it was pretty scary. This is just crazy that the Capitol has been breached. That there's a mob on the Capitol stairs right outside where the House and the Senate is meeting. The Capitol Police are saying they weren't prepared for this, even though the president said this was happening 2 months ago. He just held a rally saying we're about to march to the Capitol. The Capitol is closed to visitors, so it's unclear about how did someone breach the Capitol and get inside. But both chambers, the Senate and the House, have recessed. We're not in the Capitol at all. We're in another secure location. I don't want to disclose because, don't want to let you know where I'm at. But the Capitol's prepared for this stuff. There's gas masks underneath, seats, and, there's tunnels, and there's, little nooks and, crannies everywhere. But it just begs the question that, can you imagine Black Lives Matter doing this? In my lifetime, I never thought I would see, civilians storm the Capitol steps and have an act of insurrection, on that day. I never thought I would see the President of the United States encourage folks, to interfere with its own government. That was new to me.
Shocking.
Very shocking. Mm-hmm.
You've been in D.C. for quite some time now. Talk about your role as the Chief of Staff for Karen Bass.
It's an exciting role. I tell folks that I have the ability to wake up every day and do a job that I absolutely love, to advocate on behalf of the 37th Congressional District here in California. One reason why I'm so interested in the work that I do, I would say that it started during the 92 civil unrest. And most folks would tell you what they remember about the 92 civil unrest was the looting, the flames, the National Guard. But for me, what stood out was the community coming together and reimagining what our neighborhoods would look like. And I saw the introduction of community gardens into health clinics, to grocery stores. And so I saw what people do, once they're given the opportunity to reimagine, what their community will look like. So I just have a philosophy that the best public policy comes from the folks who are affected by that public policy. And so as a Chief of Staff, I am the Chief Policy Advisor to the Congresswoman. But, that is really fueled with people power. Everyday people, having their say-so in the public policy that affects, their lives. And so it's a job that I take with, great honor of involving folks within the legislative process.
How important is it for you, Congresswoman Bass, to have a talented, gifted Chief of Staff like Darryn Harris?
It's everything. The Chief of Staff essentially is the one who keeps everything functioning. The member cannot do that. I have to focus on my part of the job, so my office would not be able to function if I did not have a very strong chief of staff. And then one of the most important things about a chief of staff is that you really need to have somebody that you have complete 100% trust in. And I absolutely trust Darryn, and he's very well respected and liked by everybody. And so I think it's knowing the job, but it's also having those qualities of emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, organization. And to me, one of the most important qualities is a commitment to our community.
We were talking off camera before you and I sat down. Not only are you in your office well respected here in Southern California, but obviously because of media, your office and you are recognized not only around the country, but around the globe. Are you able to do that because Mr. Harris is on your team?
Well, let me put it this way. I couldn't do it if he wasn't on my team. And just to give you an example, Darryn Harris was the director of my district office in Los Angeles. And I had a crisis, it was a very sudden crisis in D.C. And Darryn came to D.C. to attend an event. And I literally had to ask him on the spot, can you move to D.C.? And he said, well, sure, when? I said, today. And he said, yes. That's indicative of the commitment, the dedication, and the trust.
Prior to you being in D.C. with President Trump, you were there with President Obama. That had to be a night and day contrast.
We have a strange way of telling history within this country. And so folks will make it seem as if that act, the January 6th act, started that morning. But to me, that started, years ago with President Obama. Folks who just never accepted the fact that he was American. During the State of the Union, you have members of Congress who, shout, "You lie."
This too is false. The reforms I'm proposing would not apply to those who are here illegally.
You have the leader in the Senate who says, my number one priority is to make sure that Barack Obama is going to be a failed, president.
Our top political priority over the next 2 years should be to deny President Obama a second term.
To go into the presidency with all these different items, against you, and still to come out, without scandal, is something that I think that should be applauded. President Barack Obama ensured that, government worked for folks. Unlike President Trump, he didn't believe in government. And so he went in with the sole purpose of dismantling, government cube by cube, office by office, agency by agency. And so it was pretty difficult, engaging with the president who really didn't believe in government working, for people or for at all.
Are you surprised that race has just really surfaced and will not dissipate the racial divide in the nation? I know people say the country is divided, but they don't say about what.
Yeah, I mean, folks are, calling for unity too. And I'm just like, so what are we united about? Around what? I would say that I am hopeful with this new administration. President Joe Biden has listed 4 priorities. One being, of course, getting a handle of COVID-19. Another being dealing with the economy and ways that we can recover, climate change, but also around racial equity. And the emphasis being around equity, not just equality, not just fairness, but really zero in on justice. And so I'm hopeful that the fact that this is one of the pillars of his administration, things that he said that he'll hit the ground running, that we will finally address racial equity within this country, because there is a legacy of slavery. Slavery has never ended in this country; it just has evolved. Evolved from slavery, went through Jim Crow, And now we see it through mass incarceration and police brutality. And so having a president who's, calling the sin for what it is and really, using the power of the Oval Office to address it.
Because you're in the position you're in, you've been able to be throughout the country at significant flashpoints of history. You were there with George Floyd death. You were there at his service. Talk about what is that like for you, really being a part of history and being at the check mark of history, the intersection of history.
Well, I mean, speaking about, George Floyd, I wish that I was not attending his funeral. Let's just say that. And I remember, receiving the news about George Floyd and, being a black man in America, you hear about these stories all the time. It reminds me when I was a kid. I remember being at the dinner table and folks tell you about police brutality all the time. And these are images that you never quite saw on TV because they didn't exist. And I remember when the Rodney King footage was finally found. I remember hearing my family and my neighbors say, finally, we finally got the evidence. We finally have, proof that shows the type of brutality that our community deals with. And here we are, many, years later, and we're still tackling with the same, issues with the surveillance. So this is something that has always been a part of, my worldview. But because of COVID and because the entire world stopped, there's no entertainment, sports, Vegas shut down, Disneyland shut down. There's nothing to do but pretty much zero in what's happening on our socials. And it really gave audience to many people who just did not believe that something like this was going on in America. And so when you have moments like that, it's important to act. I remember feeling idle, saying I wanted to do so much around that time. I wanted to be in the streets. I wanted to rally, with folks. But I just have to say that I didn't, because we all have our different roles and, we have our different hats that we wear. And so for me, having the opportunity to work on a Justice and Policing Act, in Congress, given the excitement that was happening on the outside, given that you had, folks who never engaged in this type of work finally taking notice. I mean, I think that when I remember looking on my phone to see who was there, and I said, well, this is interesting. Like, these aren't white folks out here marching, for George Floyd. And when you have those moments in time, you have to seize them. You have to take advantage of them.
What's next for you? This is a pretty lofty perch you're on now, serving a congressional member who was looked at briefly for vice president, but who was well respected, not only in Southern California for her work, but around the country and even the globe. What's next for Darryn Harris?
I'm using this opportunity to, deepen the issues that I care so much about.
Those are?
The issues, being criminal justice reform, work within the child welfare, area. And then I have a personal issue around student loan debt reform. And, given that, Congress has a trifecta, meaning that we have the House, we have the Senate, we have the White House, we have 2 years to get it right. And so how do we use this opportunity, to make the most? And so that's what's next for me, is just making sure that the issues that I care for are just moving forward, and then we can find some way of, celebrating them later on when we're out of jail and debt-free.
So you're going to hang around politics a little while longer?
Just a little bit longer.
Darryn Harris, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.